Prague 2022, 70,000 people demanded that the government avoid raising the price of energy. And a similar rally was held in Cologne in Germany. The protesters held up signs with slogans against the EU and NATO, waved Russian flags and called for a dialogue with Moscow. The organizers were the openly pro-Russian parties Tricolor and Prisyaha. It is noteworthy that earlier identical calls were actively spread in Europe via Russian propaganda. According to Reuters insider information, Putin stakes on raising the price of energy to force Europe to ease sanctions against the Kremlin. So, should we worry about what Moscow's propaganda is spreading? For many years, Russia has been investing a lot of money in forming the pro-Russian perspective among the citizens of Europe. Creating and developing openly pro-Russian mass media in Europe, such as Russia Today and Sputnik. The Kremlin actively infiltrates society with its own propaganda. And the most terrible thing is that not only another point of view was raised or another angle on this or that event presented. This would not contradict but serve democracy. The true goal of the Russian Federation is to spread that is due to the methods of influence, misinformation among the citizens of the EU and generating new disagreements and conflicts within Europe. All the activities of this kind of mass media are directed at causing harm. So I think it's time to find out more about what kind of tools Russia uses to provoke social instability in Europe. My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today I tell you a little bit more about how Russia really acts. A rather dubious agency from Russia offered the French millionaire blogger Léo Grasset a big reward for posts about the harm of the COVID-19 vaccine. A number of other European influencers got similar offers. According to the French investigative Fact and Furious website, all of them received an offer of cooperation from the company related to the former PR specialist of the party Единая Россия, Yulia Serebryanskaya. The public disclosure of these facts revealed the new efforts made in Russian-aligned disinformation. A campaign that taps into skepticism and fears of coronavirus vaccination does not just undermine the effort to immunize people, but also tries to falsely link national institutions to the idea of a forced inoculation. Numerous opinion leaders, bloggers, and even Russian officials contributed to the spread of contradictions, conspiracy theories, and blatant lies about vaccines in Europe. And this was one of several conclusions by the European External Action Service, which is the EU Foreign Policy Ministry, if you so want. The theses of the Kremlin propaganda lay well on the ground of the general neurotization of society against the background of deaths from COVID and numerous strict government restrictions. Thousands of anti-vaccination protests covered the EU. Rome, Prague, Amsterdam, Brussels, Vienna, Berlin, Athens, Bratislava. Smoke grenades, tear gas and water cannons were used. Hundreds of protesters were detained. Dozens of police officers were hospitalized. Commenting on the decision of closing Russia-funded media in Europe, Josep Borrell, High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, called the Kremlin's systematic information manipulation a significant and direct threat to the Union's public order and security. It is noteworthy that the Kremlin-controlled media, such as Russia Today and Sputnik, have a relatively small audience in the European countries. However, their released stories received surprisingly high distribution rates. As The Guardian mentions, according to the report published by the Policy Institute at King's College in London, Russia Today and Sputnik narratives on the European democracies have mostly negative connotations. Stories, coverage or interviews about the UK, the US, France, Germany, Sweden, Italy were overwhelmingly focused on issues of social and political dysfunction, including coverage of the negative effect of immigration. According to the report of the RAND Analytical Center, the communities of the EU Russian-speaking citizens are highly loyal to such theses. Having analyzed the Kremlin's tactics, the experts note a special attention to attempting to drive wedges between ethnic Russian or Russian-speaking populations and their governments. It is especially noticeable in Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. In 2007, the Russian politicians sharply criticized the decision of the Estonian government to dismantle the monument to the Soviet soldier, erected on a mass grave in Tallinn. The quotes of the Kremlin indignation were completed with rumors and widely spread by pro-Russian media, and it reported that the monument was sawn into pieces and the remains of the buried soldiers were thrown into garbage, and the opponents of the decision were subjected to torture. The Russian-speaking population erupted in protests and destructions in several Estonian cities. Later, those events were called a Bronze Night, and the police was forced to use batons and tear gas. 1,200 people were detained. 50 people were injured. The French Rassemblement National, led by Marine Le Pen, received $11.7 million from the first Czech Russian bank in Moscow. It was one of the more eloquent evidence examples of Russia's funding of the far-right nationalists in Europe. Turning to the right in the EU is connected with the migration crisis in 2015. At that time, the Kremlin-supported war in Syria provoked the largest flow of migrants to Europe since the Second World War. The number of refugees was increasing, and the number of Europeans who voted for the far-right nationalist parties in the election was increasing as well. Those parties became the Kremlin's allies, but they are united not only by the ideological dislike of the United Europe and NATO, but also by very significant financial infusions into the election campaigns by Russia. According to the report of the Political Capital Institute, a research organization in Budapest, the Kremlin's support for the far-right parties can include not only direct funding, but professional media and organizational support as well. The list of political parties supported by Russia can be continued. Beyond the French Rassemblement National, the Italian Lega Norte, the Austrian FPÖ, the Hungarian Fidesz, or the German AfD. Many far-right parties have been lobbying for pro-Russian positions, often ignoring the interests of their own countries and fighting against the sanctions imposed on Russia in order to help Russia to avoid punishment for its crimes. Sometimes they have even been trying to radicalize the views of their voters, complicating the dialogues and creating tensions in the society while dealing with the burning issues. Meanwhile, the number of far-right crimes committed, for instance in Germany, skyrocketed to the record highest level in the last 2 decades. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, in 2020, the number of such crimes accounted for more than half of all politically motivated crimes. The representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Maria Zakharova, called the claims of Russia's influence in the Brexit process Russophobia, and the spokesman of Russian President Dmitry Peskov said that Russia had never interfered in the electoral process in the United States, Great Britain, or any other country. However, in a few months after the Brexit referendum in 2016, the investigators of the New York Times found more than 150,000 Russian-language Twitter accounts posting thousands of messages in English on the days before the previous year's referendum on the issue, urging Britain to leave the European Union. A lot of messages fueled fears on Muslims and migrants. Some messages mocked the attempts to leave the United Kingdom in the EU. At that time, British Prime Minister Theresa May accused the Russian Federation of interfering in the political affairs of Great Britain and attempting to provoke the West. And recently, the Intelligence and Security Committee of the British Parliament publicized a report on, in its opinion, Russia's hostile activities on the territory of Great Britain and claimed that interference was a security threat posed to the UK democratic processes by Russia. The process of Brexiting became one of the most divisive issues in the British society. Richard Ferrand, the chief assistant of the French presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron, said that Russian state-controlled media, Russia Today and Sputnik, spread fake stories to turn the electorate against Macron. And the fact that the candidate campaign faced numerous cyber attacks. The Kremlin rejects all accusations of hacker attacks and cooperation with hackers. Despite this, in February 2017, the year of the attack on Macron's campaign, the so-called information operations troops were created in the Russian Federation. Feike Hackebord, a researcher with the security firm Trend Micro, published information on the involvement of the cyber espionage organization Pawn Storm, tightly connected with the special services of Russia, in the cyber attacks on Macron's campaign. The detected digital fingerprints are the reason to consider that the attacks were made by the same hackers who attacked the Democratic Party of the United States, and also the German Chancellor Merkel in 2016. This is the YouTube channel The Power of Reason. Always remember that our true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we are threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news. So, please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.